SCUM Manifesto, Valerie Solanas. Life in this society being at best an utter bore, and no aspect of society being at all relevant to women, there remains to civic-minded, responsible, thrill-seeking females only to overthrow the government, eliminate the money system, institute complete automation, and destroy the male sex. It is now technically possible to reproduce without the aid of males, or for that matter females, and to produce only females. We must begin immediately to do so. Retaining the male has not even the dubious purpose of reproduction. The male is a biological accident. The Y male gene is an incomplete X female gene. That is, has an incomplete set of chromosomes. In other words, the male is an incomplete female, a walking abortion, aborted at the gene stage. To be male is to be deficient, emotionally limited. Maleness is a deficiency disease, and males are emotional cripples. The male is completely egocentric, trapped inside himself, incapable of empathizing or identifying with others of love, friendship, affection, or tenderness. He is a completely isolated unit, incapable of rapport with anyone. His responses are entirely visceral, not cerebral. His intelligence is a mere tool in the service of his drives and needs. He is incapable of mental passion, mental interaction. He can't relate to anything other than his own physical sensations. He is a half-dead, unresponsive lump, incapable of giving or receiving pleasure or happiness. Consequently, he is at best an utter bore, an inoffensive blob, since only those capable of absorption in others can be charming. He is trapped in a twilight zone halfway between humans and apes, and is far worse off than the apes, because unlike the apes, he is capable of a large array of negative feelings: hate, jealousy, contempt, disgust, guilt, shame, doubt, and moreover, he is aware of what he is and isn't. Although completely physical, the male is unfit even for stud service. Even assuming mechanical proficiency, which few men have, he is first of all incapable of zestfully, lustfully tearing off a piece, but is instead eaten up with guilt, shame, fear and insecurity, feelings rooted in male nature, which the most enlightened training can only minimize. Second, the physical feeling he attains is next to nothing. And third, he is not empathizing with his partner, but is obsessed with how he's doing, turning in an A performance, doing a good plumbing job. To call a man an animal is to flatter him. He's a machine, a walking dildo. It is often said that men use women. Use them for what? Surely not pleasure. Eaten up with guilt, shame, fears and insecurities, and obtaining, if he's lucky, a barely perceptible physical feeling, the male is, nonetheless, obsessed with screwing. He'll swim a river of snot, wade nostril deep through a mile of vomit, if he thinks there'll be a friendly pussy awaiting him. He'll screw a woman he despises, any snaggle-toothed hag, and furthermore pay for the opportunity. Why? Relieving physical tension isn't the answer, as masturbation suffices for that. It's not ego satisfaction. That doesn't explain screwing corpses and babies. Completely egocentric, unable to relate, empathize, or identify, and filled with a vast, pervasive, diffuse sexuality, the male is physically passive. He hates his passivity, and so he projects it onto women, defines the male as active, then sets out to prove that he is, prove he's a man. His main means of attempting to prove it is screwing, big man with a big dick tearing off a big piece. Since he's attempting to prove an error, he must prove it again and again. Screwing, then, is a desperate, compulsive attempt to prove he's not passive, not a woman, but he is passive and does want to be a woman. Being an incomplete female, the male spends his life attempting to complete himself, to become female. He attempts to do this by constantly seeking out, fraternizing with, and trying to live through and fuse with the female, and by claiming as his own all female characteristics. Emotional strength and independence, forcefulness, dynamism, decisiveness, coolness, objectivity, assertiveness, courage, integrity, vitality, intensity, depth of character, grooviness, etc. And projecting onto women all male traits, vanity, frivolity, triviality, weakness, etc. It should be said, though, that the male has one glaring area of superiority over the female: public relations. He has done a brilliant job of convincing millions of women that men are women and women are men. The male claim that females find fulfillment through motherhood and sexuality reflects what males think they'd find fulfilling if they were female. Women, in other words, don't have penis envy. Men have pussy envy. When the male accepts his passivity, defines himself as a woman, males as well as females think men are women and women are men, and becomes a transvestite, he loses his desire to screw, or to do anything else for that matter. He fulfills himself as a drag queen and gets his cock chopped off. He then achieves a continuous diffuse sexual feeling from being a woman. Screwing is, for a man, a defence against his desire to be female. Sex is itself a sublimation. The male, because of his obsession to compensate for not being female, combined with his inability to relate and to feel compassion, has made of the world a shit pile. He is responsible for war. The male's normal method of compensation for not being female, namely getting his big gun off, is grossly inadequate, as he can get it off for only a very limited number of times. So he gets it off on a really massive scale and proves to the entire world that he's a man. Since he has no compassion or ability to empathise or identify, proving his manhood is worth an endless amount of mutilation and suffering, and an endless number of lives, including his own life being worthless. He would rather go out in a blaze of glory than plod grimly on for 50 more years. Niceness, politeness, and dignity. Every man deep down knows he's a worthless piece of shit, overwhelmed by a sense of animalism and deeply ashamed of it, wanting not to express himself, but to hide from others his total physicality, total egocentricity, the hate and contempt he feels for other men, and to hide from himself the hate and contempt he suspects other men feel for him. Having a crudely constructed nervous system that is easily upset by the least display of emotional feeling, the male tries to enforce a social code that ensures a perfect blandness, unsullied by the slightest trace of feeling or upsetting opinion. He uses terms like copulate, sexual congress, have relations with, To men, sexual relations is a redundancy, overlaid with stilted manners. The suit on the chin. Money, marriage and prostitution, work and prevention of an automated society. There is no human reason for money, or for anyone to work more than 2 or 3 hours a week at the very most. All non-creative jobs, practically all jobs now being done, could have been automated long ago, and in a moneyless society everyone can have as much of the best of everything as she wants. But there are non-human, male reasons for maintaining the money work system. 1. Pussy. Despising his highly inadequate self, overcome with intense anxiety and a deep, profound loneliness, when by his empty self, desperate to attach himself to any female in dim hopes of completing himself, in the mystical belief that by touching gold he'll turn to gold, the male craves the continuous companionship of women. The company of the lowest female is preferable to his own or that of other men, who serve only to remind him of his repulsiveness. But females, unless very young or very sick, must be coerced or bribed into male company. 2. Supply of non-relating male with the delusion of usefulness, and enable him to try to justify his existence by digging holes and filling them up. Leisure time horrifies the male, who will have nothing to do but contemplate his grotesque self. Unable to relate or to love, the male must work. Females crave absorbing, emotionally satisfying, meaningful activity, but lacking the opportunity or ability for this, they prefer to idle and waste their time in ways of their own choosing. Sleeping, shopping, bowling, shooting pool, playing cards and other games, breeding, reading, walking round, daydreaming, eating, playing with themselves, popping pills, going to the movies, getting analysed, travelling, raising dogs and cats, lolling on the beach, swimming, watching TV, listening to music, decorating their houses, gardening, sewing, nightclubbing, dancing, visiting, improving their minds, taking courses, and absorbing culture, lectures, plays, concerts, arty movies. Therefore, many females would, even assuming their complete economic equality between the sexes, prefer living with males or peddling their asses on the street, thus having most of their time for themselves, to spending many hours of their days doing boring, stultifying, non-creative work for somebody else, functioning less as animals, as machines, or, at best, if able to get a good job, co-managing the shit pile. What will liberate women, therefore, from male control is the total elimination of the money work system, not the attainment of economic equality with men within it. 3. Power and control. Unmasterful in his personal relations with women, the male attains to general masterfulness by the manipulation of money and of everything and everybody controlled by money, in other words, of everything and everybody. 4. Love substitute. Unable to give love or affection, the male gives money. It makes him feel motherly. The mother gives milk, he gives bread. He is the breadwinner. 5. Provides the male with a goal. Incapable of enjoying the moment, the male needs something to look forward to, and money provides him with an eternal, never-ending goal. Just think what you could do with $80 trillion. Invest it, and in 3 years' time you'd have $300 trillion. 6. provides the basis for the male's major opportunity to control and manipulate. Fatherhood. Fatherhood and mental illness, fear, cowardice, timidity, humility, insecurity, passivity. Mother wants what's best for her kids. Daddy only wants what's best for daddy, that is, peace and quiet, pandering to his delusion of dignity, respect, a good reflection on himself, status, and the opportunity to control and manipulate, or if he's an enlightened father, to give guidance. His daughter, in addition, he wants sexually. He gives her hand in marriage. The other part is for him. Daddy, unlike mother, can never give in to his kids as he must at all costs. Preserve his delusion of decisiveness, forcefulness, always rightness and strength. Never getting one's way leads to lack of self-confidence in one's ability to cope with the world and to a passive acceptance of the status quo. Mother loves her kids, although she sometimes gets angry, but anger blows over quickly and even while it exists doesn't preclude love and basic acceptance. Emotionally diseased daddy doesn't love his kids. He approves of them if they're good, that is, if they're nice, respectful, obedient, subservient to his will, quiet, and not given to unseemly displays of temper that would be most upsetting to daddy's easily disturbed male nervous system. In other words, if they're passive vegetables. If they're not good, he doesn't get angry, not if he's a modern, civilized father. The old-fashioned, ranting, raving brute is preferable, as he is so ridiculous he can be easily despised, but rather expresses disapproval, a state that, unlike anger, endures and precludes a basic acceptance, leaving the kid with a feeling of worthlessness and a lifelong obsession with being approved of. The result is fear of independent thought, as this leads to unconventional, disapproved opinions and way of life. For the kid to want daddy's approval, it must respect daddy, and being garbage, daddy can make sure that he is respected only by remaining aloof, by distance, by acting on the precept familiarity breeds contempt, which is of course true if one is contemptible. By being distant and aloof, he is able to remain unknown, mysterious, and thereby to inspire fear, respect. Disapproval of emotional scenes leads to fear of strong emotion, fear of one's own anger and hatred, and to a fear of facing reality, as facing it leads at first to anger and hatred. Fear of anger and hatred combined with a lack of self-confidence in one's ability to cope with and change the world, or even to affect in the slightest way one's own destiny, leads to a mindless belief that the world and most people in it are nice and that the most banal, trivial amusements are great fun and deeply pleasurable. The effect of fatherhood on males specifically is to make them men. That is, highly defensive of all impulses to passivity, faggotry, and of desires to be female. Every boy wants to imitate his mother, be her, fuse with her, but daddy forbids this. He is the mother. He gets to fuse with her. So he tells the boy, sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly, to not be a sissy, to act like a man. The boy, scared shitless of and respecting his father, complies and becomes just like daddy, that model of manhood, the all-American ideal, the well-behaved heterosexual dullard. The effect of fatherhood on females is to make them male. Dependent, passive, domestic, animalistic, nice, insecure, approval and security seekers, cowardly, humble, respectful of authorities and men, closed, not fully responsive, half-dead, trivial, dull, conventional, flattened out, and thoroughly contemptible. Daddy's girl, always tense and fearful, uncool, unanalytical, lacking objectivity, appraises Daddy, and thereafter other men, against a background of fear, respect, and is not only unable to see the empty shell behind the aloof facade, but accepts the male definition of himself as superior, as a female, and of herself as inferior. As a male, which thanks to Daddy, she really is. It is the increase of fatherhood resulting from the increased and more widespread affluence that fatherhood needs in order to thrive that has caused the general increase of mindlessness and the decline of women in the United States since the 1920s. The close association of affluence with fatherhood has led, for the most part, to only the wrong girls, namely the privileged middle-class girls, getting educated. The effect of fathers in some has been to corrode the world with maleness. The male has a negative Midas touch. Everything he touches turns to shit. Suppression of individuality, animalism, domesticity and motherhood, and functionalism. The male is just a bundle of conditioned reflexes, incapable of a mentally free response. He is tied to his early conditioning, determined completely by his past experiences. His earliest experiences are with his mother, and he is throughout his life tied to her. It never becomes completely clear to the male that he is not part of his mother, that he is he and she is she. His greatest need is to be guided, sheltered, protected and admired by Mama. Men expect women to adore what men shrink from in horror, themselves. And, being completely physical, he yearns to spend his time that's not spent out in the world, grimly defending against his passivity, wallowing in basic animal activities, eating, sleeping, shitting, relaxing, and being soothed by Mama. Passive, rattle-headed daddy's girl, ever eager for approval, for a pat on the head, for the respect of any passing piece of garbage, is easily reduced to Mama. Mindless ministrator for physical needs, soother of the weary, apy brow, booster of the puny ego, appreciator of the contemptible, a hot water bottle with tits. The reduction to animals of the women of the most backward segment of society, the privileged, educated middle class, the backwash of humanity where daddy reigns supreme, has been so thorough that they try to groove on labour pains and lie around in the most advanced nation in the world in the middle of the 20th century with babies chomping away on their tits. It's not for the kids' sake. Though the experts tell women that Mama should stay home and grovel in animalism, but for daddies, the tits for daddy to hang on to, the labour pains for daddy to vicariously groove on. Half dead, he needs awfully strong stimuli to make him respond. Reducing the female to an animal, to Mama, to a male, is necessary for psychological as well as practical reasons. The male is a mere member of the species, interchangeable with every other male. He has no deep-seated individuality which stems from what intrigues you, what outside yourself absorbs you, what you're in relation to. Completely self-absorbed, capable of being in relation only to their bodies and physical sensations, males differ from each other only to the degree and in the ways they attempt to defend against their passivity and against their desire to be female. The female's individuality, which he is acutely aware of, but which he doesn't comprehend and isn't capable of relating to or grasping emotionally, frightens and upsets him and fills him with envy. So he denies it in her and proceeds to define everyone in terms of his or her function or use, assigning to himself, of course, the most important functions: doctor, president, scientist, thereby providing himself with an identity, if not individuality, and tries to convince himself and the women, he's succeeded best at convincing women, that the female function is to bear and raise children and to relax, comfort and boost the ego of the male, that her function is such as to make her interchangeable with every other female. In actual fact, the female function is to relate, groove, love and be herself, irreplaceable by anyone else. The male function is to produce sperm. We now have sperm banks. In actual fact, the female function is to explore, discover, invent, solve problems, crack jokes, make music, all with love. In other words, create a magic world. Prevention of privacy. Although the male, being ashamed of what he is and of almost everything he does, insists on privacy and secrecy in all aspects of his life, he has no real regard for privacy. Being empty, not being a complete separate being, having no self to groove on and needing to be constantly in female company, he sees nothing at all wrong in intruding himself on any woman's thoughts, even a total stranger's, anywhere at any time, but rather feels indignant and insulted when put down for doing so, as well as confused. He can't for the life of him understand why anyone would prefer so much as 1 minute of solitude to the company of any creep around. Wanting to become a woman, he strives to be constantly around females, which is the closest he can get to becoming one. So he created a society based on the family, a male-female couple and their kids, the excuse for the family's existence, who live virtually on top of one another, unscrupulously violating the female's rights, privacy and sanity. Isolation, suburbs and prevention of community. Our society is not a community, but merely a collection of isolated family units. Desperately insecure, fearing his woman will leave him if she is exposed to other men or to anything remotely resembling life, the male seeks to isolate her from other men and from what little civilization there is, so he moves her out to the suburbs, a collection of self-absorbed couples and their kids. Isolation enables him to try to maintain his pretense of being an individual by becoming a rugged individualist, a loner, equating non-cooperation and solitariness with individuality. There is yet another reason for the male to isolate himself. Every man is an island, trapped inside himself, emotionally isolated, unable to relate. The male has a horror of civilization, people, cities, situations requiring an ability to understand and relate to people. So, like a scared rabbit, he scurries off, dragging daddy's little arsehole along with him to the wilderness, the suburbs, or in the case of the hippie, he's way out, man, all the way out to the cow pasture where he can fuck and breed undisturbed and mess around with his beads and flute. The hippie, whose desire to be a man, a rugged individualist, isn't quite as strong as the average man's, and who, in addition, is excited by the thought of having lots of women accessible to him, rebels against the harshness of a breadwinner's life and the monotony of one woman. In the name of sharing and cooperation, he forms the commune or tribe, which, for all its togetherness and partly because of it, the commune being an extended family, is an extended violation of the female's rights, privacy and sanity, is no more a community than normal society. A true community consists of individuals, not mere species members, not couples, respecting each other's individuality and privacy, at the same time interacting with each other mentally and emotionally, free spirits in free relation to each other and cooperating with each other to achieve common ends. Traditionalists say the basic unit of society is the family. Hippies say the tribe. No one says the individual. The hippie babbles on about individuality, but has no more conception of it than any other man. He desires to get back to nature, back to the wilderness, back to the home of the furry animals that he's one of, away from the city where there is at least a trace, a bare beginning of civilization, to live at the species level, his time taken up with simple, non-intellectual activities. Farming, fucking, bead stringing. The most important activity of the commune, the one on which it is based, is gang-banging. The hippie is enticed to the commune mainly by the prospect of all the free pussy, the main commodity to be shared, to be had just for the asking, but blinded by greed he fails to anticipate all the other men he has to share with, or the jealousies and possessiveness of the pussies themselves. Men cannot cooperate to achieve a common end, because each man's end is all the pussy for himself. The commune, therefore, is doomed to failure. Each hippie will, in panic, grab the first simpleton who digs him and whisk her off to the suburbs as fast as he can. The male cannot progress socially, but merely swings back and forth from isolation to gangbanging. Conformity. Although he wants to be an individual, the male is scared of anything in himself that is the slightest bit different from other men. It causes him to suspect that he's not really a man, that he's passive and totally sexual, a highly upsetting suspicion. If other men are A and he's not, he must not be a man, he must be a fag, so he tries to affirm his manhood by being like all the other men. Differentness in other men as well as in himself threatens him. It means they're fags, whom he must at all costs avoid, so he tries to make sure that all other men conform. The male dares to be different to the degree that he accepts his passivity and his desire to be female, his fagginess. The farthest out male is the drag queen, but he, although different from most men, is exactly like all other drag queens. Like the functionalist, he has an identity, he is female. He tries to define all his troubles away, but still no individuality. Not completely convinced that he's a woman, highly insecure about being sufficiently female, he conforms compulsively to the man-made feminine stereotype, ending up as nothing but a bundle of stilted mannerisms. To be sure he's a man, the male must see to it that the female be clearly a woman, the opposite of a man. That is, the female must act like a faggot, and Daddy's girl, all of whose female instincts were wrenched out of her when little, easily and obligingly adapts herself to the role. authority and government. Having no sense of right or wrong, no conscience, which can only stem from an ability to empathise with others, having no faith in his non-existent self, being necessarily competitive and by nature unable to cooperate, the male feels a need for external guidance and control, so he creates authorities, priests, experts, bosses, leaders, etc., and government. Wanting the female, mama, to guide him, but unable to accept this fact, he is, after all, a man. Wanting to play woman, to usurp her function as guider and protector, he sees to it that all the authorities are male. There's no reason why a society consisting of rational beings capable of empathizing with each other, complete and having no natural reason to compete, should have a government, laws, or leaders. Philosophy, religion, and morality based on sex. The male's inability to relate to anybody or anything makes his life pointless and meaningless. The ultimate male insight is that life is absurd. So, he invented philosophy and religion. Being empty, he looks outwards, not only for guidance and control, but for salvation and the meaning of life. Happiness being for him impossible on this earth, he invented heaven. For a man, having no ability to empathize with others and being totally sexual, wrong is sexual license and engaging in deviant, unmanly sexual practices, that is, not defending against his passivity and total sexuality, which, if indulged, would destroy civilization, since civilization is based entirely on the male need to defend himself against these characteristics. For a woman, according to men, wrong is any behaviour that would entice men into sexual license, that is, not placing male needs above her own and not being a faggot. Religion not only provides the male with a goal, heaven, and keeps women tied to men, but offers rituals through which he can try to expiate the guilt and shame he feels at not defending himself enough against his sexual impulses. In essence, that guilt and shame he feels at being male. Most men, utterly cowardly, project their inherent weaknesses onto women, label them female weaknesses, and believe themselves to have female strengths. Most philosophers, not quite so cowardly, face the fact that male lacks exist in men, but still can't face the fact that they exist in men only. So they label the male condition the human condition, pose their nothingness problem, which horrifies them, as a philosophical dilemma, thereby giving stature to their animalism, grandiloquently label their nothingness their identity problem, and proceed to prattle on pompously about the crisis of the individual, the essence of being, existence preceding essence, existential modes of being, etc., etc. A woman not only takes her identity and individuality for granted, but knows instinctively that the only wrong is to hurt others, and that the meaning of life is love. Prejudice, racial, ethnic, religious, etc. The male needs scapegoats onto whom he can project his failings and inadequacies, and upon whom he can vent his frustration at not being female. And the various discriminations have the practical advantage of substantially increasing the pussy pool available to the men on top. Competition, prestige, status, formal education, ignorance, and social and economic classes. Having an obsessive desire to be admired by women but no intrinsic worth, the male constructs a highly artificial society, enabling him to appropriate the appearance of worth through money, prestige, high social class, degrees, professional position, and knowledge, and by pushing as many other men as possible down professionally, socially, economically, and educationally. The purpose of higher education is not to educate, but to exclude as many as possible from the various professions. The male, totally physical, incapable of mental rapport, although able to understand and use knowledge and ideas, is unable to relate to them, to grasp them emotionally. He does not value knowledge and ideas for their own sake. They're just means to ends, and consequently feels no need for mental companions, no need to cultivate the intellectual potentialities of others. On the contrary, the male has a vested interest in ignorance. It gives the few knowledgeable men a decided edge on the unknowledgeable ones, and besides, the male knows that an enlightened, aware female population will mean the end of him. The healthy, conceited female wants the company of equals whom she can respect and groove on. The male and the sick, insecure, unself-confident male-female crave the company of worms. No genuine social revolution can be accomplished by the male, as the male on top wants the status quo, and all the male on the bottom wants is to be the male on top. The male rebel is a farce. This is the male's society, made by him to satisfy his needs. He's never satisfied because he's not capable of being satisfied. Ultimately, what the male rebel is rebelling against is being male. The male changes only when forced to do so by technology, when he has no choice, when society reaches the stage where he must change or die. We're at that stage now. If women don't get their asses in gear fast, we very well may all die. Prevention of conversation. Being completely self-centered and unable to relate to anything outside himself, the male's conversation, when not about himself, is an impersonal droning on removed from anything of human value. Male intellectual conversation is a strained, compulsive attempt to impress the female. Daddy's girl. Passive, adaptable, respectful of and in awe of the male, allows him to impose his hideously dull chatter on her. This is not too difficult for her, as the tension and anxiety, the lack of cool, the insecurity and self-doubt, the unsureness of her own feelings and sensation that Daddy instilled in her, make her perceptions superficial and render her unable to see that the male's babble is a babble, like the aesthete appreciating the blob that's labelled great art. She believes she's grooving on what bores the shit out of her. Not only does she permit his babble to dominate, she adapts her own conversation accordingly. Trained from early childhood in niceness, politeness and dignity, in pandering to the male need to disguise his animalism, she obligingly reduces her conversation to small talk, a bland, insipid avoidance of any topic beyond the utterly trivial, or if educated, to intellectual discussion, that is, impersonal discoursing on irrelevant abstractions. The gross national product, the common market, the influence of Rimbaud on symbolist painting, So adept is she at pandering that it eventually becomes second nature, and she continues to pander to men, even when in the company of other females only. Apart from pandering, her conversation is further limited by her insecurity about expressing deviant, original opinions, and the self-absorption based on insecurity, and that prevents her conversation from being charming. Niceness, politeness, dignity, insecurity, and self-absorption are hardly conducive to intensity and wit, qualities a conversation must have to be worthy of the name. Such conversation is hardly rampant, as only completely self-confident, arrogant, outgoing, proud, tough-minded females are capable of intense, bitchy, witty conversation. Prevention of friendship, love. Men have contempt for themselves, for all other men whom they contemplate more than casually, and whom they do not think females, for example, sympathetic analysts and great artists or agents of God, and for all women who respect and pander to them. The insecure, approval-seeking, pandering male females have contempt for themselves and for all women like them. The self-confident, swinging, thrill-seeking females have contempt for men and for the pandering male females. In short, contempt is the order of the day. Love is not dependency on sex, but friendship, and therefore love can't exist between two males, between a male and a female, or between two females, one or both of whom is a mindless, insecure, pandering male. Like conversation, love can exist only between two secure, freewheeling, independent, groovy females, since friendship is based on respect, not contempt. Even among groovy females, deep friendships seldom occur in adulthood, as almost all of them are either tied up with men in order to survive economically, or bogged down in hacking their way through the jungle and in trying to keep their heads above the amorphous mass. Love can't flourish in a society based on money and meaningless work. It requires complete economic as well as personal freedom, leisure time, and the opportunity to engage in intensely absorbing, emotionally satisfying activities which, when shared with those you respect, lead to deep friendship. Our society provides practically no opportunity to engage in such activities. Having stripped the world of conversation, friendship, and love, the male offers us these paltry substitutes. Great art and culture. The male artist attempts to solve his dilemma of not being able to live, of not being female, by constructing a highly artificial world in which the male is heroized, that is, displays female traits, and the female is reduced to highly limited, insipid, subordinate roles, that is, to being male. The male artistic aim being not to communicate, having nothing inside him he has nothing to say, but to disguise his animalism. He resorts to symbolism and obscurity, deep stuff. The vast majority of people, particularly the educated ones, lacking faith in their own judgment, humble, respectful of authority. Daddy knows best is translated into adult language as critic knows best, writer knows best, PhD knows best, are easily conned into believing that obscurity, evasiveness, incomprehensibility, indirectness, ambiguity, and boredom are marks of depth and brilliance. Great art proves that men are superior to women, that men are women, being labelled great art, almost all of which, as the anti-feminists are fond of reminding us, was created by men, we know that great art is great because male authorities have told us so, and we can't claim otherwise, as only those with exquisite sensitivities far superior to ours can perceive and appreciate the greatness, the proof of their superior sensitivity being that they appreciate the slop that they appreciate. Appreciating is the sole diversion of the cultivated, passive and incompetent, lacking imagination and wit. They must try to make do with that, unable to create their own diversions, to create a little world of their own, to affect in the smallest way their environments. They must accept what's given. Unable to create or relate, they spectate. Absorbing culture is a desperate, frantic attempt to groove in an ungroovy world, to escape the horror of a sterile, mindless existence. Culture provides a sop to the egos of the incompetent, a means of rationalizing, passive spectating. They can pride themselves on their ability to appreciate the finer things, to see a jewel where there is only a turd. They want to be admired for admiring. Lacking faith in their ability to change anything, resigned to the status quo, they have to see the beauty in turds, because so far as they can see, turds are all they'll ever have. The veneration of art and culture, besides leading many women into boring, passive activity that distracts from more important and rewarding activities, from cultivating active abilities, and leads to the constant intrusion on our sensibilities of pompous dissertations on the deep beauty of this and that turd. This allows the artist to be set up as one possessing superior feelings, perceptions, insights and judgments, thereby undermining the faith of insecure women in the value and validity of their own feelings, perceptions, insights and judgments. The male, having a very limited range of feelings and consequently very limited perceptions, insights and judgments, needs the artist to guide him, to tell him what life is all about. But the male artist, being totally sexual, unable to relate to anything beyond his own physical sensations, having nothing to express beyond the insight that for the male life is meaningless and absurd, cannot be an artist. How can he, who is not capable of life, tell us what life is all about? A male artist is a contradiction in terms. A degenerate can only produce degenerate art. The true artist is every self-confident, healthy female, and in a female society, the only art, the only culture, will be conceited, cooky, funky females grooving on each other and on everything else in the universe. Sexuality. Sex is not part of a relationship. On the contrary, it is a solitary experience, non-creative, a gross waste of time. The female can easily, far more easily than she may think, condition away her sex drive, leaving her completely cool and cerebral and free to pursue truly worthy relationships and activities. But the male, who seems to dig women sexually, and who seeks to constantly arouse them, stimulates the highly sexed female to frenzies of lust, throwing her into a sex bag from which few women ever escape. The lecherous male, excited the lustful female he has too. When the female transcends her body, rises above animalism, the male, whose ego consists of his cock, will disappear. Sex is the refuge of the mindless, and the more mindless the woman, the more deeply embedded in the male culture. In short, the nicer she is, the more sexual she is. The nicest women in our society are raving sex maniacs. But, being just awfully, awfully nice, they don't of course descend to fucking, that's uncouth. Rather they make love, commune by means of their bodies, and establish sensual rapport. The literary ones are attuned to the throb of eros, and attain a clutch upon the universe. The religious have spiritual communion with the divine sensualism. The mystics emerge with the erotic principle and blend with the cosmos, and the acid heads contact their erotic cells. On the other hand, those females least embedded in the male culture, the least nice, those crass and simple souls who reduce fucking to fucking, who are not too childish for the grown-up world of the suburbs, mortgages, mops and baby shit, too selfish to raise kids and husbands, too uncivilized to give a shit for anyone's opinion of them, too arrogant to respect daddy, the greats or the deep wisdom of the ancients, who trust only their own animal gutter instincts, who equate culture with chicks, whose sole diversion is prowling for emotional thrills and excitement, who are given to disgusting, nasty, upsetting scenes, hateful, violent bitches given to slamming those who unduly irritate them in the teeth, who'd sink a shiv into a man's chest or ram an ice pick up his arsehole as soon as look at him, if they knew they could get away with it. In short, those who, by the standards of our culture, are scum, these females are cool and relatively cerebral and skirting asexuality. Unhampered by propriety, niceness, discretion, public opinion, morals, the respect of arseholes, always funky, dirty, low-down scum gets around and around and around. They've seen the whole show, every bit of it, every fucking scene, the sucking scene, the dyke scene. They've covered the whole waterfront, been under every dock and pier, the Peter Pier, the Pussy Pier. You've got to go through a lot of sex to get to anti-sex, and scum has been through it all, and now they're ready for a new show. They want to crawl out from under the dock, move, take off, sink out. But scum doesn't yet prevail. Scum's still in the gutter of our society, which, if it's not deflected from its present course, and if the bomb doesn't drop on it, will hump itself to death. Boredom. Life in a society made by and for creatures who, when they are not grim and depressing, are utter bores, can only be, when not grim and depressing, an utter bore. Secrecy, censorship, suppression of knowledge and ideas and exposés. Every male's deep-seated secret, most hideous fear is the fear of being discovered to be not a female, but a male, a subhuman animal. Although niceness, politeness and dignity suffice to prevent his exposure on a personal level, in order to prevent the general exposure of the male sex as a whole and to maintain his unnatural dominant position in society, the male must resort to 1. Censorship, responding reflexly to isolated words and phrases rather than cerebral to overall meanings. the male attempts to prevent the arousal and discovery of his animalism by censoring not only pornography, but any work containing dirty words, no matter in what context they are used. 2. Suppression of all ideas and knowledge that might expose him or threaten his dominant position in society. Much biological and psychological data is suppressed because it is proof of the male's gross inferiority to the female. Also, the problem of mental illness will never be solved while the male maintains control, because first, men have a vested interest in it. Only females who have very few of their marbles will allow males the slightest bit of control over anything. And second, the male cannot admit to the role that fatherhood plays in causing mental illness. 3. Exposés. The male's chief delight in life, insofar as the tense, grim male can ever be said to delight in anything, is in exposing others. Doesn't much matter what they're exposed as, so long as they're exposed. It distracts attention from himself. Exposing others as enemy agents, communists and socialists, is one of his favourite pastimes, as it removes the source of the threat to him not only from himself, but from the country and the Western world. The bugs up his ass aren't in him, they're in Russia. Distrust. Unable to empathise or feel affection or loyalty, being exclusively out for himself, the male has no sense of fair play, cowardly, needing constantly to pander to the female to win her approval that he is helpless without, always on edge lest his animalism, his maleness, be discovered, always needing to cover up, he must lie constantly. Being empty, he has no honour or integrity. He doesn't know what those words mean. The male, in short, is treacherous, and the only appropriate attitude in a male society is cynicism and distrust. Ugliness. Being totally sexual, incapable of cerebral or aesthetic responses, totally materialistic and greedy, the male, besides inflicting on the world great art, has decorated his unlandscaped cities with ugly buildings, both inside and out, ugly decors, billboards, highways, cars, garbage trucks, and most notably, his own putrid self. Hate and violence. The male is eaten up with tension, with frustration at not being female, at not being capable of ever achieving satisfaction or pleasure of any kind, eaten up with hate. Not rational hate that is directed at those who abuse or insult you, but irrational, indiscriminate hate. Hatred at bottom of his own worthless self. Gratuitous violence, besides proving he is a man, serves as an outlet for his hate, and in addition, the male, being capable only of sexual responses and needing very strong stimuli to stimulate his half-dead self, provides him with a little sexual thrill. Disease and death. All diseases are curable, and the aging process and death are due to disease. It is possible, therefore, never to age and to live forever. In fact, the problems of aging and death could be solved within a few years if an all-out massive scientific assault were made on the problem. This, however, will not occur within the male establishment because 1. The many male scientists who shy away from biological research, terrified of the discovery that males are females, and show marked preference for virile, manly war and death programs. 2. the discouragement of many potential scientists from scientific careers by the rigidity, boringness, expensiveness, time-consumingness, and unfair exclusivity of our higher educational system. 3. Propaganda disseminated by insecure male professionals who jealously guard their positions so that only a highly select few can comprehend abstract scientific concepts. 4. Widespread lack of self-confidence brought about by the father system that discourages many talented girls from becoming scientists. 5. Lack of automation. There now exists a wealth of data which, if sorted out and correlated, would reveal the cure for cancer and several other diseases, and possibly the key to life itself. But the data is so massive, it requires high-speed computers to correlate it all. The institution of computers will be delayed interminably under the male control system, since the male has a horror of being replaced by machines. 6. The money system's insatiable need for new products. Most of the few scientists around who aren't working on death programs are tied up doing research for corporations. 7. The male likes death. It excites him sexually, and already dead inside, he wants to die. 8. The bias of the money system for the least creative scientists. Most scientists come from at least relatively affluent families where daddy reigns supreme. Incapable of a positive state of happiness, which is the only thing that can justify one's existence, the male is at best relaxed, comfortable, neutral, and this condition is extremely short-lived, as boredom and negative state soon sets in. He is therefore doomed to an existence of suffering, relieved only by occasional, fleeting stretches of restfulness, which state he can achieve only at the expense of some female. The male is, by his very nature, a leech, an emotional parasite, and therefore not ethically entitled to live, as no one has the right to live at someone else's expense. Just as humans have a prior right to existence over dogs by virtue of being more highly evolved and having a superior consciousness, so women have a prior right to existence over men. The elimination of any male is therefore a righteous and good act, an act highly beneficial to women, as well as an act of mercy. However, this moral issue will eventually be rendered academic by the fact that the male is gradually eliminating himself. In addition to engaging in the time-honoured and classical wars and race riots, men are more and more either becoming fags or obliterating themselves through drugs. The female, whether she likes it or not, will eventually take complete charge, if for no other reason than that she will have to. The male, for practical purposes, will not exist. Accelerating this trend is the fact that more and more males are acquiring enlightened self-interest. They're realizing more and more that the female interest is their interest, that they can live only through the female, and that the more the female is encouraged to live, to fulfill herself, to be a female and not a male, the more nearly he lives. He's coming to see that it's easier and more satisfactory to live through her than to try to become her and usurp her qualities, claim them as his own, push the female down and claim she's a male. The fag who accepts his maleness, that is, his passivity in total sexuality, his femininity, is also best served by women being truly female, as it would then be easier for him to be male, feminine. If men were wise, they would seek to become really female, would do intensive biological research that would lead to men, by means of operations on the brain and nervous system, being able to be transformed in psyche as well as body into women. Whether to continue to use females for reproduction or to reproduce in the laboratory will also become academic. What will happen when every female 12 and over is routinely taking the pill and there are no longer any accidents? How many women will deliberately get, or, if an accident, remain pregnant? No, Virginia. Women don't just adore being brood mares, despite what the massive robot brainwashed women will say. When society consists of only the fully conscious, the answer will be none. Should a certain percentage of women be set aside by a force to serve as brood mares for the species? Obviously, this will not do. The answer is laboratory reproduction of babies. As for the issue of whether or not to continue to reproduce males, it doesn't follow that because the male-like disease has always existed among us, that he should continue to exist. When genetic control is possible, and it soon will be, it goes without saying that we should produce only whole, complete beings, not physical defects or deficiencies, including emotional deficiencies such as maleness. Just as the deliberate production of blind people would be highly immoral, so would be the deliberate production of emotional cripples. Why produce even females? Why should there be future generations? What is their purpose? When aging and death are eliminated, why continue to reproduce? Why should we care what happens when we're dead? Why should we care that there is no younger generation to succeed us? Eventually, the natural course of events, of social evolution, will lead to total female control of the world, and subsequently to the cessation of the production of males, and ultimately to the cessation of production of females. But SCUM is impatient. SCUM is not consoled by the thought that future generations will thrive. SCUM wants to grab some thrilling living for itself, and if a large majority of women were SCUM, they could acquire complete control of this country within a few weeks, simply by withdrawing from the labour force, thereby paralysing the entire nation. Additional measures, any one of which would be sufficient to completely disrupt the economy and everything else, would be for women to declare themselves off the money system, stop buying, just loot, and simply refuse to obey all laws they don't care to obey. The police force, the National Guard, Army, Navy and Marines combined couldn't squelch a rebellion of over half the population, particularly when it's made up of people they are utterly helpless without. If all women simply left men, refused to have anything to do with any of them ever, all men, the government and the national economy would collapse completely. Even without leaving men, women who are well aware of the extent of their superiority to and power over men could acquire complete control over everything within a few weeks, could effect a total submission of males to females. In a sane society, the male would trot along obediently after the female. The male is docile and easily led, easily subjected to the domination of any female who cares to dominate him. The The male, in fact, desperately wants to be led by females, wants mama in charge, wants to abandon himself to her care. But this is not a sane society, and most women are not even dimly aware of where they're at in relation to men. The conflict, therefore, is not between females and males, but between scum, dominant, secure, self-confident, nasty, violent, selfish, independent, proud, thrill-seeking, freewheeling, arrogant females who consider themselves fit to rule the universe, who freewheel to the limits of this society and are ready to wheel onto something far beyond what it has to offer. A nice, passive, accepting, cultivated, polite, dignified, subdued, dependent, scared, mindless, insecure, approval-seeking daddy's girls who can't cope with the unknown, who want to continue to wallow in the sewer that is at least familiar, who want to hang back with the apes, who feel secure only with Big Daddy standing by, with a big strong man to lean on, and with a fat hairy face in the White House, who are too cowardly to face up to the hideous reality of what man is, what Daddy is, who have cast their lot with the swine, who have adapted themselves to animalism, feel superficially comfortable with it, and know no other way of life, who have reduced their minds, thoughts, and sights to the male level, who, lacking sense, imagination, and wit, can have value only in a male society, who can have a place in the sun, or rather in the slime, only as soothers, ego boosters, relaxers, and breeders, who are dismissed as inconsequent by other females who project their deficiencies, their maleness onto all females, and see the female as a worm. But scum is too impatient to hope and wait for the de-brainwashing of millions of arseholes. Why should the swinging females continue to plod dismally along with the dull male ones? Why should the fates of the groovy and the creepy be intertwined? Why should the active and imaginative consult the passive and dull on social policy? Why should the independent be confined to the sewer along with the dependent who need daddy to cling to? A small handful of scum can take over the country within a year by systematically fucking up the system, selectively destroying property and murder. Scum will become members of the unwork force, the fuck up force. They will get jobs of various kinds and unwork. For example, scum sales girls will not charge for merchandise. Scum telephone operators will not charge for calls. Scum office and factory workers, in addition to fucking up their work, will secretly destroy equipment. Scum will unwork at a job till fired, then get a new job to unwork at. Scum will forcibly relieve bus drivers, cab drivers, and subway token sellers of their jobs and run buses and cabs and dispense free tokens to the public. Scum will destroy all useless and harmful objects, cars, store windows, great art, etc. Eventually, scum will take over the airwaves, radio and TV networks by forcibly relieving of their jobs all radio and TV employees who would impede scum's entry into the broadcasting studios. Scum will couple bust barge into mixed male-female couples wherever they are and bust them up. Scum will kill all men who are not in the men's auxiliary of scum. Men in the men's auxiliary are those men who are working diligently to eliminate themselves. Men who, regardless of their motives, do good. Men who are playing ball with scum. A few examples of the men in the men's auxiliary are men who kill men, biological scientists who are working on constructive programs as opposed to biological warfare, journalists, writers, editors, publishers and producers who disseminate and promote ideas that will lead to the achievement of scum's goals, faggots who by their shimmering flaming example encourage other men to de-man themselves and thereby make themselves relatively inoffensive, men who consistently give things away, money, things, services, men who tell it like it is, so far not one ever has, who put women straight, who reveal the truth about themselves, who give the mindless male-females correct sentences to parrot, who tell them a woman's primary goal in life should be to squash the male sex. To aid men in this endeavour, scum will conduct turd sessions at which every male present will give a speech beginning with the sentence, "I am a turd, a lowly abject turd," then proceed to list all the ways in which he is. His reward for doing so will be the opportunity to fraternise after the session for a whole solid hour with the scum who will be present. Nice, clean-living male women will be invited to the sessions to help clarify any doubts and misunderstandings they may have about the male sex. Makers and promoters of sex books and movies, etc., who are hastening the day when all that will be shown on the screen will be suck and fuck, males like the rats following the Pied Piper will be lured by pussy to their doom, will be overcome and submerged by, and will eventually drown in the passive flesh that they are, drug pushers and advocates who are hastening the dropping out of men. Being in the men's auxiliary is a necessary but not a sufficient condition for making scum's escape list. It's not enough to do good, to save their worthless asses. Men must also avoid evil. A few examples of the most obnoxious or harmful types are rapists, politicians and all who are in their service, campaigners, members of political parties, etc., lousy singers and musicians, chairmen of boards, breadwinners, landlords, owners of greasy spoons and restaurants that play muzak, great artists, cheap pikers and welchers, cops, tycoons, scientists working on death and destruction programs or for private industry, practically all scientists, liars and phonies, disc jockeys, men who intrude themselves in the slightest way on any strange female, real estate men, stockbrokers, men who speak when they have nothing to say, men who loiter idly on the street and mar the landscape with their presence, double dealers, flim-flam artists, litterbugs, plagiarizers, men who in the slightest way harm any female, all men in the advertising industry, psychiatrists and clinical psychologists, dishonest writers, journalists, editors, publishers, etc., censors on both the public and private levels, all members of the armed forces, including draftees. LBJ and McNamara give orders, but servicemen carry them out, and particularly pilots. If the bomb drops, LBJ won't drop it, a pilot will. In the case of a man whose behaviour falls into both the good and bad categories, an overall subjective evaluation will be made to determine if his behaviour is, in the balance, good or bad. It is most tempting to pick off the female great artists, liars and phonies, etc. along with the men, but that would be inexpedient, as it would not be clear to most of the public that the female killed was a male. All women have a think streak in them, to a greater or lesser degree, but it stems from a lifetime of living among men. Eliminate men, and women will shape up. Women are improvable, men are not, although their behaviour is. When scum gets hot on their asses, it'll shape up fast. Simultaneously with the fucking up, looting, couple busting, destroying and killing, scum will recruit. Scum then will consist of recruiters, the elite corps, the hardcore activists, the fuck-ups, looters and destroyers, and the elite of the elite, the killers. Dropping out is not the answer. Fucking up is. Most women are already dropped out. They were never in. Dropping out gives control to those few who don't drop out. Dropping out is exactly what the establishment leaders want. It plays into the hands of the enemy. It strengthens the system instead of undermining it, since it is based entirely on non-participation, passivity, apathy, and non-involvement of the mass of women. Dropping out, however, is an excellent policy for men, and scum will enthusiastically encourage it. Looking inside yourself for salvation, contemplating your navel, is not, as the dropout people would have you believe, the answer. Happiness lies outside yourself, is achieved through interacting with others. Self-forgetfulness should be one's goal, not self-absorption. The male, capable of only the latter, makes a virtue of an irredeemable fault and sets up self-absorption not only as a good, but as a philosophical good, and thus gets credit for being deep. Scum will not picket, demonstrate, march, or strike to attempt to achieve its ends. Such tactics are for nice, genteel ladies who scrupulously only take such action as is guaranteed to be ineffective. In addition, only clean-living male women highly trained in submerging themselves in the species act on a mob basis. Scum consists of individuals. Scum is not a mob, a blob. Only as many scum will do a job as are needed for the job. Also, scum, being cool and selfish, will not subject itself to getting rapped on the head with billy clubs. That's for the nice, privileged, educated, middle-class ladies with a high regard for the touching faith in the essential goodness of daddy and policemen. If scum ever marches, it will be over the president's stupid, sickening face. If scum ever strikes, it will be in the dark with a 6-inch blade. Scum will always operate on a criminal as opposed to a civil disobedience basis. That is, as opposed to openly violating the law and going to jail in order to draw attention to an injustice. Such tactics acknowledge the rightness of the overall system and are used only to modify it slightly, change specific laws. Scum is against the entire system, the very idea of law and government. Scum is out to destroy the system, not attain certain rights within it. Also, scum, always selfish, always cool, will always aim to avoid detection and punishment. Scum will always be furtive, sneaky, underhanded, although scum murders will always be known to be such. Both destruction and killing will be selective and discriminate. Scum is against half-crazed indiscriminate riots with no clear objective in mind, and in which many of your own kind are picked off. Scum will never instigate, encourage, or participate in riots of any kind or any other form of indiscriminate destruction. Scum will coolly, furtively stalk its prey and quietly move in for the kill. Destruction will never be such as to block off routes needed for the transportation of food or other essential supplies, contaminate or cut off the water supply, block streets and traffic to the extent that ambulances can't get through, or impede the functioning of hospitals. Scum will keep on destroying, looting, fucking up and killing until the money-work system no longer exists and automation is completely instituted, or until enough women cooperate with scum to make violence unnecessary to achieve these goals. That is, till enough women either unwork or quit work, start looting, leave men, and refuse to obey all laws inappropriate to a truly civilized society. Many women will fall into line, but many others, who surrendered long ago to the enemy, who are so adapted to animalism, to maleness, that they like restrictions and restraints, don't know what to do with freedom, will continue to be toadies and doormats, just as peasants in rice paddies remain peasants in rice paddies as one regime topples another. A few of the more volatile will whimper and sulk and throw their toys and dish rags on the floor, but scum will continue to steamroller over them. A completely automated society can be accomplished very simply and quickly once there is a public demand for it. The blueprints for it are already in existence, and its construction will only take a few weeks with millions of people working at it. Even though off the money system, everyone will be most happy to pitch in and get the automated society built. It will mark the beginning of a fantastic new era, and there will be a celebration atmosphere accompanying the construction. The elimination of money and the complete institution of automation are basic to all other scum reforms. Without these two, the others can't take place. With them, the others will take place very rapidly. The government will automatically collapse. With complete automation, it will be possible for every woman to vote directly on every issue by means of an electronic voting machine in her house. Since the government is occupied almost entirely with regulating economic affairs and legislating against purely private matters, the elimination of money, and with it the elimination of males who wish to legislate morality, will mean that there will be practically no issues to vote on. After the elimination of money, there will be no further need to kill men. They will be stripped of the only power they have over psychologically independent females. They will be able to impose themselves only on the doormats who like to be imposed upon. The rest of the women will be busy solving the few remaining unsolved problems before planning their agenda for eternity and utopia, completely revamping educational programs so that millions of women can be trained within a few months for high-level intellectual work that now requires years of training. This can be done very easily once our educational goal is to educate and not to perpetuate an academic and intellectual elite, solving the problems of disease and old age and death, and completely redesigning our cities and living quarters. Many women will for a while continue to think they dig men, but as they become accustomed to female society and as they become absorbed in their projects, they will eventually come to see the utter uselessness and banality of the male. The few remaining men can exist out their puny days, dropped out on drugs or strutting around in drag or passively watching the high-powered female in action, fulfilling themselves as spectators, vicarious livers, or breeding in the cow pasture with the toadies. Or they can go off to the nearest friendly suicide centre, where they will be quietly, quickly, and painlessly gassed to death. Prior to the institution of automation, to the replacement of males by machines, the male should be of use to the female, wait on her, cater to her slightest whim, obey her every command, be totally subservient to her, exist in perfect obedience to her will, as opposed to the completely warped, degenerate situation we have now of men not only not existing at all, cluttering up the world with their ignominious presence, but being pandered to and grovelled before by the mass of females. Millions of women piously worshipping the golden calf, the dog leading the master on the leash, when in fact the male, short of being a drag queen, is least miserable when his dogginess is recognised. No unrealistic emotional demands are made of him, and the completely together female is calling the shots. Rational men want to be squashed, stepped on, crushed and crunched, treated as the curs, the filth that they are, have their repulsiveness confirmed. The sick, irrational men, those who attempt to defend themselves against their disgustingness when they see scum barreling down on them, will cling in terror to Big Mama with her big bouncy boobies, but boobies won't protect them against scum. Big Mama will be clinging to Big Daddy, who will be in the corner shitting in his forceful dynamic pants. Men who are rational, however, won't kick or struggle or raise a distressing fuss, but will just sit back, relax, enjoy the show, and ride the waves to their demise. I've been Elizabeth Hobson, leader of Justice for Men and Boys and the Women Who Love Them, reading some comparative literature from Valerie Solanas, SCUM Manifesto.